Hi guys, today we'll be talking about functions. I will show you how you can use functions to structure your code into reusable units. Let's create our functions folder. Okay, I think we have one already. Let's create index.js in here. And yeah, so basically functions are simple ways to structure your code into several chunks that can be reused over time. So I'll show you a quick example. So this is a function called sum, and this function returns 5 times 5. I'm going to explain this shortly. Let's have another function. I'll call this sum with params a comma b, and I'll say return a times b. Well, what you see here is the function declaration, of course. We have the function name, and in here we have the parameters. This is a regular bracket, just like what we have here. So we have two parameters here, a and b. It can actually be probably name 1 and name 2, or it can be anything basically, surname and first name. So depending on how you choose to depending on what you want to do, right? Basically depending on what you want to do. So let's say we have the parameter in here, we have the function name, which is also similar to what we have here. This has no parameter, as you can see, and then we have the return statement. Now the return statement is basically used for returning a value and then terminating the flow or the execution of any code you have within this function. So for example, what I mean here is that the moment you have the return statement, anything beneath that would not work, except you have the return statement probably within some sort of condition, right? Which we'll look at very soon. Right now, it's just at the root level of the function. So assuming we have this in some sort of block, and then probably this block contains something like if a, which is to say if a exists, right? So then return this. But if a does not exist, then continue the execution here, something like that. Yeah, so basically that is the function of the return keyword. All right, let's go back here and let's do something realistic. So we have a function that would return the value of 5 times 5. To call this function, all we have to do is call the name of the function with the bracket. So this calls function. This is our statement in here. So this has what you call a scope, right? So this is a function scope. Anything you have within these braces is a scope, right? Which means if you have like let's a equals 10, and here you have a, when you pass in a value like 20, the scope, the value of a within this function scope is 20, right? So we can say a times 5, right, or 5 times a. If we go ahead and console.log, what we have here, or we probably assign this to a different variable like let's results, and then we console.log results. Let's go ahead and test this to see what we have. You see we have 100, right? So we're multiplying 5 by the value we have in here, which is 20, and not this, because this is the scope, and whatever comes in here is based on what you passed in, so it's not affected by this other value, right? So that's how you basically call a function. If I don't pass in the value and I run this, you see we're going to get not a number because you're multiplying 5 times a, and a was not really passed in, right? So yeah, so let's say 5 times 5. So you see we have 25. Now basically at this point we're passing in the parameters. So let's go ahead and change what we're calling here. This is 5, 5. We have two parameters right here. So we can say return a times b, right? And let's see what we have when we run this. You see we have 25 because we just passed in 5 and 5. Let's pass in 2. We should expect 10, right? So basically that is how you work with functions, and there are different ways to initialize or create functions. I'll show you a couple of examples right away. So let's go ahead and within the functions, we have something called arguments. Now, arguments is basically going to populate the values of what you have in here. So if you pass them in, right, it's just a way to access those items. So let's assume we're trying to print out the arguments. So what I have here, we're basically trying to print out the arguments, and if we run this, see what we have. See what we have. So this is an array holding these items as as objects, right? So you have the 0 and 1, which is basically saying you can access the first parameter using the index of 0. So if we say console.log arguments of 0, right, and 1. Let's try this. So you see we're able to get 5 and 2, right? So which are basically the arguments. Okay. So let's yeah. So that is how you work with arguments. To get the values of what you're passing. What I'm going to show you right now is the different ways to create functions. So this is what we've done is basically the standard way, or the rather main way of creating a function. But there are other ways you can create a function. You can use the arrow function. So let's assume we have a function called greeting. Yeah, so you can use this pattern, which is known as arrow function. So we can have let's say first name, last name. The idea is we want to always use this this greeting. So we can say let's also pass time of day, right, which is going to be morning, afternoon, and evening. So we're going to say if time of day is equals morning. So we want this to return. Let's go ahead and compose, say first name plus last name, right? So you can do that, or probably we can just select full name equals. So you can either say first name, plus you have the concatenation here, last name. So now you have the full name, right? So you can just return full name. I'm just showing you says you have time of day, so good morning. Now this is not looking very neat, but yeah, this is so we can go ahead and try this. We have greeting, we have marvelous, we have Solomon, we have time of day, let's say morning. One thing you might want to do is to try work with some string function. So we have morning here. What if this person passes morning? Else, actually else return. Let's just return null. So basically, what is going to happen here is if you pass in something that is not looking exactly like this, this is not going to work, right? So if we say results equals, and we say console.log results, so I think we have another results here. Let's go ahead and change this to result 1. Okay. So let's see what we have if we execute this. You see we have null, basically because of this morning. So let's run again. You see Marvelous Solomon says good morning. Okay, so how do we fix this, right? Basically what we can just do is to convert the time of day, and make sure it has you can say to lower. Let's try that. All right, so to lower is not a function. All right, so I think I was trying to pick out from the difference. Yeah, so it should be to lower case. Okay, let's try that. Yeah, so we see we just converted it to lowercase. So now we're passing in morning. Let's probably take this off. I don't know, let's just comment on that so we don't have that undefined, right? So you see we're able to pass in, whatever we have here. This is called the string method. What we just used here is called the string method, and we have a lot of string methods. If you want to learn more string methods, let me know, and I will create a short video for that. So this is time of day, right? And yeah, so this would always convert this item to lowercase. So you can try, you can say else if, right? And you come up with something for afternoon, something for evening. Now we're just showing you how to use this, right? There are other ways you can concatenate stuff like this, and I was trying to show you that the other time. You can basically use stuff like this. You have first name, okay, so you can do this. Okay, come on. Yeah, just like that, right? And you can also do something similar. So basically, what we're using here is called the template retrieval, and with the template retrieval, you are able to use this syntax to append your variable within a string, right? So we just created a string. I don't think this is required. Sorry about that. That is not required. So you see this works. Let us also let's say we use something similar here, right? So we use the same template retrieval pattern. Take this off. Also take this off. Take this off. Okay. All right. So this is still going to work. Okay. So now we're using template retrievals, right? But the idea is we're talking about the pattern. We just created a function. Using the arrow function method. Yeah, so as compared to this, all right? Okay. All right. So yeah, so some of you might be confused, about why do we have the arrow function or why do we have the regular function? Which one should I use? Basically, I would say you need to understand. The scope. The scope I was trying to make reference to, and another thing is the context here. So let's assume we say console.log this. So one thing you must understand is that the arrow function does not have this context. So if I go ahead to say I want to print this, right, and I want to also print this, let's comment on this first. Let's see what this would give us. So we have sum with params. We have it called here. Let us comment this out. So let's run this node. So you see this has its own this context. So this is basically calling the global object, right? This refers to the global object, and it's able to reference, the color, right? The color of that particular function. All right. So what if we comment this out and we try to run this? So let's say what we have. Basically, you see we don't have anything coming out of this because the arrow function does not have this context, which means if we try to use something like let's work with an object, for example. Of course, we have an object. Let's call this user, and user is an object. User has like a name of John. Okay, so we have a function saying greets or greeting. Okay, so we have greeting. Yeah, so one thing that you need to understand about this is that why is it okay? Yeah, sorry, I have to put the comma sign there. So we have two functions. I'm going to put the next one. This should be call, or let's say color. Remember your comma here. All right. So in here, I'm going to say we have an array function. Okay. Yeah, we can work with an arrow function. Okay. So we work with an arrow function. So the problem when working with an arrow function is an arrow function should be, oh yeah, sorry, presented like this. Okay, so we have this .name. So we want to log this .name. Same thing here. We want to say console.log name. So let's see what we have when we call greeting. So if we call user greeting, so let's see what is going to happen when we call that. So we have John Doe, right? Okay, let's call the user color. So you see we have undefined because basically this does not really have access or direct access. I mean, this is not recognized at all, right? This is not recognized at all, and now we're trying to call name without this, and you see it gives us this error. Name is not defined because it does not have access to this. So except we are going to say let name equals Mav, and then back to the terminal, and then this is working, right? What if we say this.name? What happens? Undefined because it does not have access to this global scope. So that's the basic difference, and I think it's good you understand the way it works to avoid making mistakes. But yeah, some people will prefer to write their functions this way. I think sometimes when you're also working with functions related to some advanced concepts like map and reduce, sometimes using this might make your code look shorter. Probably you're writing a single line of a method, a single line method. So for example, we have something like multiply, right? And multiply should give us this, a comma b, return a times b, right? So yeah, we don't need this, do I? Okay, so if we do multiply 1, 2, let's log this. Let's see what we have when we run this. So this is telling us user is not defined. That's because we deleted the objects, right? Yeah, we did. Okay, let's run this again. So you see we have 2. What if we say 4, 2? We have 8, right? So basically, you see, you can use the arrow function to work on stuff like this. Very simple, one-line functions. Yeah, that's just an example. But I hope you understand, that you can create a function this way, and you can also create a function this way. It's possible to use a function like to pass the value of a function into a variable. Just similar to what I did here. We just pass the whole thing here into result. And another thing we can do is we can return a function within the function. So we have like function calculates, and within the function calculates, let's assume we're passing in a. We can also have return, or probably we can have function area, right? We have arrow, for example, so we can say return arrow times okay, let's do 3.142 times arrow, right? And then we can call let area. Yeah, so we're just trying to do a very basic stuff here. So we can call this value equals area. And in here we can pass in 5, right? Let's say plus 5. So basically what we're doing here is we're calling this function within another function, and it will return the value based on what we've passed in here, the variable. So we're going to have 3.142 times 5 times 5, and that value will be returned and added to 5, to store the value in here. So we can say return value, right? And in the end, we don't need this. So if we call calculates, okay, if we call calculates, basically let's see what would happen. Results consts, okay, so we're still using this again. Total console.log total, okay, so we're running this. So you see we have 85.55 because we're performing a calculation here. So let's assume we pass this into computes equals return computes. So we also want to console.log this here, so that we can see what we have here. We have 75.55, when you add plus 5, you get 83.55. So yeah, you can use as many functions as you want within another function. So let's talk about anonymous functions, right? Let's talk about anonymous functions, and the idea of anonymous functions basically is being able to write a function that executes automatically without being called. So I'm going to show you how we will do that. Let's just drop a couple of comments here. So arrow functions, okay. Um, let's call this a regular function. All right. Okay, so this is part of this guy here. Let's call this first class functions. And basically, I'm calling it first class functions because of the way it works, right? I won't call this. I think I would probably prefer to change this to. Yeah, because in the context of functional programming, there's more you can do. We also refer to that as higher order functions. We're not talking about that here. So just to avoid any confusion, I'm going to leave it this way. And then we're going to create a new file. I'll probably move this into multiple files, right? So let's just call this function in function JS. Right, just to keep everything simple. So I think the next item we have here, let's move this out as well. This is arrow functions. Come on. Okay, so let's delete this file, or we can just rename this file. Let's call this anonymous function. All right, so within the anonymous function, basically you can write self-executing functions like this. It should be in brackets. So we have a function. Yeah, and in here we can just write like console.log triggered automatically. Let's save this file and let's run anonymous function. Oh yeah, I missed something right here. I missed executing it directly. Okay, so triggered automatically. So basically, this would trigger this code automatically. So you can do things like connecting to database, or verifying if your database was connected successfully, or any kind of self-executing script or code you want to have in here. Probably populating your database with some kind of information. There are so many use cases, right? Yeah, you might want to use something like this, but I think you should also understand when to use this and when not to use it. But the idea is this would be invoked or called automatically when you execute this file, right? So this is basically the syntax for creating anonymous functions. I think the next thing, so you have functions without names, right? So that's the whole point. So the next thing we should look at right now is passing items. The way you pass items, the way you pass items by values. Let's look at passing items by values. We're going to pass items by value in here. So let's start by duplicating this. I'm going to call this pass values. All right. We're going to create a very simple item. We're going to be able to pass this item, as a parameter, and then access the attributes of this item. So, basically the concept is, we are able to just, access the properties of objects, right? That's basically what I want you to understand. We're going to be able to pass items via arguments or parameters into a function, and then we assess the properties of those items. So let's assume we have an object. We have username. So I would just like to use John. And let's just say age 25. Okay, so that works. Let's say let user equals. So we have something like this. Okay, so now that we have this, we have a function. We have this function. This function is going to collect the user. Okay, so function, we have the function name grab user. Okay, all right, so let's call grab user, and let's pass in user. So now that we have this function in here, we want to be able to call some of the properties or attributes we have in here. We've passed user already, which is the object, right? So you are able to let's console log user, and let's run this code. So I'm going to change this to as value. Okay, so if we run this is basically going to print out the entire content of the user. So how do you access? There are so many ways you can actually access this item, and then you can just probably print out the item. You can do what we call destructuring, but we won't talk about that. Or you can even access it using the object prototype. Let's just do the basic one for now, which is to say username, for example. Let's user name equals user that's username, right? So you can do this. Let age equals user at age, right? So we'll talk about the structuring in the later video. It's basic, but I want you to first practice with this and understand this. We'll talk about some advanced stuff in a later video. So username, age. All right, so we're able to grab these items. Let's run this again. We have John 25. Okay. All right, so we're able to grab the properties in here and do with them whatever you wish. So I think that is basically how to pass in your values or your parameters, and then play around with the properties. Sometimes you might encounter some issues, probably receiving some kind of objects, or maybe working with an object with different properties. Meanwhile, during runtime, you don't have those properties in here. You end up having a bunch of undefined. But we'll talk about how to also fix up those kind of problems as we proceed. So I think another thing we should also look at is working with default parameters. So it's very possible maybe you are expecting a bunch of parameters, but you don't, or you have a default. If the item does not exist, you have a default. So let's assume that we're working with a function. Let's call this default params.js. All right, so within this item right now, we're going to work with a very simple function again. This function is we're going to call this defaults, and within this function, we're going to have name, and we have the default of no name. So let's assume this person doesn't pass in a name, so we have a default of no name. Then we have an age, right? And for the age, we are expecting a value, right? So how do we call this? So basically, what you have to do is to call defaults, and then you have compassing name. This is the way you call it, because you want to you want to be able to say this is what I want to call. So we'll have like name, for example, I will pass in Mav, and then we'll have like the age of 12. So let's see what is wrong here. All right, so I think I was trying out probably pattern I've seen. What if we try the equal sign? Let's see. Well, I think I'm running a different file. So I'm trying to verify if the equal sign is shown. Let's say we have defaults. Okay, we did not print this, so we have result equals, always remember to put the let's console log results. Okay. Alright, so we have undefined. We have undefined. Let's change the name here to user. Let's change this to user. Oh yeah, of course. I mean, undefined, of course. We did not return this, so let's go ahead and return. Let's just return a very simple string. So I'm just going to say we have user plus, or yeah, just user is age years old. Okay, so old, spell that correctly. Age, come on. Alright, so this is what we have, and this is what we are returning. So let's run this again. So we have mav is 12. Okay. So what if what if we did not pass mav in? Definitely we're going to have a problem. So I think we probably have to undefined. We have to pass this in as undefined, so that the number 12, 12 would actually take the right place here, right? So then no name would, as you can see, we have no name is 12 years old. So yeah, basically these are the passing parameters, and you name them. Yeah, in most cases, we would advise to use some other patterns while writing code that would run in production. But this is a way to name your parameters, right? So you can also name age with a default. You can pass in a default. So we have the user with a default of no name, meaning if mav is not passed in, it works with no name, just like what you see here. Let's talk about a recursive function now. We're going to create a simple file. I'm going to call this recursive function, and of course this is the basics to recursive functions. There are a bunch of advanced stuff you could do with recursion. Recursion is a very good, it's a very nice concept that I think you need to also understand. So let's assume basically a recursion is having a function that calls itself. You use recursion when performing some kind of computation. But let's just look at the basics. Something like factorial. Where you have to call the factorial function repeatedly because you're trying to multiply the result by a new number. So let's do something. So I have like function, and we're going to call this recursive func. Right. So now we have recursive func. When do we need to call this function again? So let me copy and paste this here. So let's assume that you have console.log recurse, and then you're calling this again. So we're going to call this once. So let's see what happens. I'm going to run this file, and I'm going to terminate this with Control C, right? You should know how to terminate this kind of function. So let's run this. You see, we're going to keep having recurse. I'm going to terminate this with Control C. Right. So basically, you see this is able to, this is just calling itself multiple times, and it will continue calling itself until you probably run out of memory. Yeah. So but the way you work with this is that you probably have some kind of condition. So let's assume we have a value in here. Let's say let's count equals 1, and you want to count from 1 to 100. So basically, what you can do, have this top right here. So what you can do is to say count plus equals 1, for example, and you say if count is equal to 100. Okay. So we can just return, right? So we can return this here. Else it would call this again. So we'll say if count is equal to 100. Probably we should have if count equals 100. Return this. Else let's just try this and let's see what we have. So this is going to we're not even printing any value here. So we're going to print the value of count. So we'll say console log count. All right. So and yeah, so let's say you have 1 to 99, and it's able to break out of that once it gets to 100. So basically, this is how to use recursive function. This is pretty basic, but there are so many advanced stuff you can do with recursion. Um, yeah. So the next thing we'll talk about is objects, right? And that is going to be in a different video. So you take out your time and understand the concepts of uh, various concepts of functions.